Engineer David Carter was on Korgath Prime installing infrastructure for the newly established human embassy when he accidentally offended a Draknari warrior. The exact details of the cultural misstep remained unclear. Something about improper handling of a ceremonial weapon display he didn't realize was sacred rather than decorative. The warrior, enraged by what he perceived as deliberate disrespect, issued a formal challenge: ritual combat in the public rings to satisfy honor. David tried to decline, to apologize, to explain that humans don't have cultural frameworks for ritual combat, and he wasn't trained for such things. But Draknari law was absolute. A challenge issued must be answered. Refusing combat was considered admission of dishonor worse than defeat. The embassy staff scrambled for diplomatic solutions, but Draknari authorities were inflexible. The human had accepted the challenge through his presence at the rings when the formal words were spoken. He must fight or face deportation, damaging the fragile diplomatic relationship between their species. The Draknari were formidable, tall, powerful beings with natural physical advantages that made them apex predators, whose culture revolved around martial prowess and honor tested through combat. They viewed humans as soft, weak creatures whose reliance on technology revealed inability to survive through inherent strength. David spent 3 days in controlled panic. He wasn't a soldier. His training involved engineering systems, not fighting. Human military advisors provided crash courses in basic hand-to-hand combat, lessons in Draknari fighting conventions, advice on how to survive rather than win. His opponent, Thrakos Ironscale, was a decorated veteran who had won dozens of ring matches. The embassy staff was pessimistic, calculating that the best outcome was surviving long enough for the fight to be stopped by ritual rules before serious injury. Among the Draknari nobility who would attend was Princess Veyra Stormborn, third daughter of the ruling dynasty, known throughout Korgath Prime for her military accomplishments and cold, analytical approach to combat. She expected the match to be brief, brutal, and ultimately forgettable, just another demonstration that humans didn't belong in warrior culture. The grand arena was packed when David entered, thousands of Draknari spectators whose low conversation created sound like distant thunder. Thrakos entered from the opposite gate, and David's stomach dropped at the sheer physical presence of his opponent, easily 2 feet taller, heavily muscled, moving with confident grace. The ritual preliminaries were conducted in formal Draknari language. Then the arena master signaled start, and Thrakos moved with speed that seemed impossible for something that large. The first exchange almost ended the fight immediately. Thrakos' strike would have crushed David's ribs if it had landed clean, but desperate instinct made David twist aside at the last moment, the blow glancing rather than connecting fully. The impact still sent him staggering, ribs screaming with pain suggesting at least one crack. The crowd roared approval, expecting quick conclusion, but David didn't fall. Every survival instinct humanity evolved over millions of years activated simultaneously. He moved with desperate efficiency, avoiding rather than blocking, using Thrakos' superior size against him by staying too close for full-power strikes, targeting vulnerable points with strikes that had precision if not devastating force. He wasn't winning. He was clearly outmatched in every physical dimension, but he wasn't losing as quickly as anyone expected. Each time he went down, he forced himself back up. Each time Thrakos landed a blow, David adjusted his defense to make the next similar strike less effective. He was learning in real time, adapting with desperate intelligence of something fighting for survival against a superior predator. Princess Veyra watched from the royal box with growing fascination. She expected to see a human crumble under the first serious blow, expected pleading or surrender. Instead, she was watching something she'd never seen in the rings. Not superior skill or overwhelming strength, but pure stubborn refusal to quit despite every rational reason to do so. The fight stretched past 5 minutes, then 10, then 15, far longer than anyone anticipated. David was bleeding from multiple cuts, moving with careful precision of someone working around serious injuries, clearly exhausted beyond anything he'd probably ever experienced. But he was still fighting, still finding ways to make Thrakos work for every advantage, still forcing his body to move when it should have given up. Thrakos himself began showing frustration, then something approaching respect. This human should be unconscious or surrendered by now. Around the arena, the crowd's bloodlust began shifting to something else, recognition that they were witnessing not just a fight, but a display of courage that transcended species. Princess Veyra felt something breaking inside her perfect warrior composure. She'd spent her life believing that strength determined worth, that martial prowess was the highest virtue, that her people's physical superiority made them naturally better than softer species. But watching David fight with literally nothing except desperate courage and refusal to quit, she recognized something her culture didn't have words for. The kind of strength that has nothing to do with muscles or training, the stubborn determination to keep trying when everything rational says to give up. She didn't realize she'd spoken aloud until one of her attendants looked at her with surprise. The words escaped in a whisper that carried more emotion than her controlled voice usually allowed. "I wish he were mine." The fight ended when David finally lost consciousness, not from a single devastating blow, but from accumulated damage and exhaustion pushing past what any body could endure. He was still trying to stand when his legs gave out, still attempting to raise his guard when awareness faded. The arena fell into unusual silence. Thrakos stood over his fallen opponent, then did something unprecedented. He raised David's unconscious hand in victor's salute, acknowledging courage that impressed him more than any technical victory would have. Princess Veyra descended from the royal box, using her authority to ensure David received proper medical care. She stood over him as Draknari doctors worked to stabilize his injuries, realizing that her whispered words weren't just admiration for impressive fighting. They were recognition that this human embodied qualities she valued more than she'd consciously acknowledged. When David regained consciousness 2 days later, he was informed of several unusual developments. Thrakos had formally withdrawn any accusation of dishonor. The Draknari government issued a formal commendation, extraordinarily rare for non-Draknari. And Princess Veyra Stormborn had requested formal audience once he recovered. When she visited, Veyra spoke with honesty that surprised her own attendants. "I came to that arena expecting to watch a human fail, to reinforce my belief in my people's natural superiority. Instead, I watched you teach me something about strength I had never understood. You fought with a heart my people struggled to comprehend, not fighting to prove superiority or dominate, but fighting because you refused to quit despite knowing you couldn't win." David, still recovering, managed a response. "I wasn't being courageous. I was terrified and desperate and had no idea what I was doing. I just couldn't let myself give up because giving up felt worse than getting hurt." Veyra's smile was genuine, lacking her typical cold superiority. "That is precisely what made it courageous. Bravery without fear is just confidence. True courage is continuing despite terror. You showed my people something they needed to see. That strength comes in forms we had not valued." She paused, vulnerability in her voice. "In the arena, I whispered that I wished you were mine. I did not realize I had spoken aloud until later, but I do not retract the sentiment. You demonstrated qualities I want to understand better, perhaps to learn from, certainly to spend time near." What developed over the following months was unprecedented connection. Princess Veyra and engineer David building relationship across species and cultural divides, united by a moment in the arena where David's desperate courage cracked through Veyra's certainty about strength. Standing together in the now empty grand arena, Veyra explaining cultural significance while David shared human perspectives on courage, she asked if he'd ever willingly fight again. His answer was immediate. Absolutely not if I can help it. That was the most terrifying experience of my life. Veyra laughed, genuine, unguarded, and responded, "Good. That means you have sense along with courage. A dangerous combination, Engineer Carter. I am fortunate that, when I whispered my wish to claim you, fate apparently decided to grant it." They both changed from that day. David learned that courage he didn't know he possessed could reshape